Good morning, hello, and how are you? What a lovely morning. It's a cold one though. It's about 0 degrees. It's a lovely Tuesday. God knows whatever the time it is on the webcam. So we've had our first sort of frost. As you can see, the trees are well into losing their leaves now. Most of them are pretty much finished. No more mowing the grass for about 4 months. The goldfish have gone to sleep in the pond. Not at all interested in the food we're giving them. What else? Oh, very quiet week this week, very quiet. I think we're working this morning, Thursday morning and Friday morning, that's all. And it's a funny thing, I mean, I would, when I was a young dentist, if you told me that I could get by on working a couple of mornings a week, I would have said, no, that's impossible. But it's amazing, as you cut your hours down and you do more in the time that you do work, you tend to have a better quality of life. And you don't suffer too much financially. I must say, paying my mortgage off has helped tremendously. I mean, they do on these apps on the phones now, they do these really clever things, don't they, where they say you have got, I don't know, £3,000 in your bank. By the end of the month, you'll be £1,500 overdrawn or whatever. And now my thing says, like, you have £800 in the bank, and by the end of the month, you'll still have £600 in the bank, which is very, very strange. And I never underestimated the over your own side of the road, you bloody van. Never underestimated the stress and trauma of having to find the mortgage payment every month. It is something that working people, possibly if you're employed, then you don't worry so much, especially if you're on a fixed rate mortgage. You know what your mortgage payments are going to be. I mean, I've got, if you've got, say, I don't know, £4,000 a month coming in, and your mortgage payment's 650, then it's not going to worry you too much, is it? But if you've got no guaranteed income at all because you're self-employed, and your mortgage payment is somewhere between £2,000 and £3,000 a month, it's a different kettle of fish. And that was the situation that I had coming in. I still don't. I still don't earn any money from my dentistry. I don't think my surgery would. If I took out of my surgery what a dentist should take out, or expects to take out, or used to take out as prescribed by the Doctors and Dentists Review Body, then my surgery would have to shut. I can't support that level of profit. But if you're not that worried, I mean, I've got two pensions coming in. I've got my old age pension and my NHS pension coming in. So, and now no mortgage. So, I can much more easily run a non-profit dental surgery. Not that the patients, think it's non-profit. They probably think that, I'm earning what a dentist normally earns, but they don't realise I take home the odd. Well, every few months I draw £1,000 out. That's all. Every few months I draw £1,000 out, so it amounts to a few £1,000s a year. But why should they? Why should they know? Why should they worry? They're just everything costs £100, as someone said to me the other day. Everything costs £100. And that's the public waking up to the fact that the government has printed a ton of money, and so the value of the money's worth less, and so obviously everybody wants more money in return for their goods and services. So if you hear someone say everything's so expensive these days, then you should, if you're a sort of regular listener to these podcasts, you should know that this is no massive surprise. It's an abuse of the Keynesian money printer that causes these problems. And it was pointed out conclusively that inflation is a problem of printing money. It's a fiscal problem, in that fiscal is what the government does, and monetary is what the Bank of England does in terms of setting the size of the monetary supply. And what the government does is it monetizes debt, which is a trite phrase of not very explanatory, but the way it works is that the government overspends. They either have to tax, spend, or borrow, the government, to get their money. And they don't like cutting down on spending. They can't raise everything that they want through taxation, so they have to borrow. And the way they borrow is to write IOUs to the Bank of England, which the Bank of England then puts on its balance sheet and sits on them, and authorises the Treasury to release a load of money, which the government then spends, which mostly ends up in the stock market. So this inflation of the money supply is a tax, and it's a tax on everybody who uses money or owns anything that's denominated in money, like a pension or savings. And the rate at which the public don't notice that their money is being debased is about 2% a year. So if you can keep the expansion of the money supply down to 2% a year, and then which then feeds through into price inflation, the public tend not to notice price inflation of 2% a year. But that's not what we've had recently. We've had far more than that. We've had 10% inflation a few years ago, and we've still got 4% inflation now. And the problem is that the public does notice even 4% inflation. And they certainly notice a period where they've had included 10% inflation. So that's why everybody's going around saying, why is everything so expensive? And the answer is for reasons which I explained to you years ago during COVID. That is, i.e., the expansion in the money supply, which has a 2-year lag. So in other words, they expand the money supply, and then 2 years later inflation shoots up. Money supply expansion precedes retail price expansion, inflation, by 2 years. So if you're smart, you'll have tried to protect your wealth by investing in something that's not subject to inflation tax. So the only two things really that I know that are not, subject are gold, and in particular gold sovereign coins, which are legal tender and therefore not subject to either VAT or capital gains tax, and Bitcoin. As you know, I'm a big fan of Bitcoin. And Bitcoin, because it's been misclassified as a commodity, is subject to capital gains tax. Personally, I think The problem with Bitcoin was that it's a currency and it's a commodity, and people can't understand how you can have. Well, I suppose they understand gold, but gold's not really a currency anymore. Gold is more of a commodity than a currency now, whereas Bitcoin is more of a currency than a commodity. So, but rather than classifying Bitcoin as legal tender like they have gold, they classify it as a commodity like pork bellies or oil. So we've got a budget coming up on the 26th of November, which everybody's unhappy about because it's going to throw a massive, great, hairy spanner in the works of the economy. Sort of the week before Black Friday and 2 weeks, 3 weeks before the Christmas shopping session. And I think that's why we're quite at work. I honestly think that we've got nobody's coming at the moment because they're waiting to see what the budget's going to come up with. And where are we now? It's the 15th. So it's Thursday next week is the budget. And it's been delayed. It's been put back a month. And I think that's because the Labour government was rather hoping that they were going to get some good news in. Everything was bad. And so they were rather hoping we'd get some positive economic news, whereas in fact it's everything that they care about, growth, inflation, etc., has been unrelentingly bad. And in far from having more good news, they've had more bad news. So, what's that flying over? Oh, looks like a kestrel. They're out this morning searching the hedgerow for field mice and stuff. So the Labour Party, is been a massive disappointment. Got in with a accidental massive majority. Accidental, literally. And we're now stuck with for 4 years. Is they really only have work on the basis of two underlying principles. One is that everything is better off if it's organised and controlled by the government, and that capitalism is bad, and that their other fundamental principle is that the government should be funded by simply looking at society, seeing who's the most successful and just confiscating their wealth. That's literally, it's as simple as that. That's all. That's as deep as they think. Now you can't argue. I mean, I'm not going to say they shouldn't have been elected. The public, in its wisdom, can do whatever they like. So, but I don't have much sympathy with people who possibly voted Labour and then are now complaining about the fact they've got no money. That's their lookout, I think, as I've said before, I think part of your job really, as a small business person and as a citizen individual, is to try and insulate yourself from the effects of government. So, I personally think their idea that everything would be done better if it was done by the government is completely wrong. It's completely the opposite. The government is a disaster. Everything it touches is a disaster. There's only really two things that need to be done by the government. One is the judiciary and the other is the armed forces. Other than that, almost everything else can be left to the free market. And a good example of this is that there was a eagerly anticipated return of a band called the Oasis, who I've never really saw. I mean, obviously I've heard of them. And they had like a reunion tour. And, tickets went for hundreds and possibly thousands of pounds for this. And they were, the resale value of these tickets was massive. And a lot of people who wanted to go and see the tour couldn't go. I mean, that's just competition in supply. There's always reasons why people can't go to concerts. There's always far more people who want to go than there are places. I mean, look at Glastonbury, for example. God knows there's enough space at Glastonbury, and yet people still can't get tickets. So there's now demands for the government to ban the resale of tickets far greater than their market, than their face value, And all the solutions that have been suggested to this are completely barking mad. It's either that you should be able to resell them back to, or you have to return them to the ticket master or whoever and get a refund, or none of these will work. There's an old saying that the solution to high prices is high prices, and that's how the market would resolve it. They would just say, look, I know you want to drive a Rolls Royce, but you haven't got enough money to drive a Rolls Royce, so rather than crying that the government should bring the price of Rolls Royces down to what you can afford, just buy another car, cut your suit according to your cloth. Then the other element of it, of course, is the taxation. There's a guy called Laffer who invented a thing called the Laffer curve, and what it does is it basically states it's a sort of a rule or a principle that if you put up taxes too high, you get less tax, paradoxically, because you increase the number of people who find ways of avoiding the tax, either moving out of the country or putting their money in a blind trust, or as I do, just don't bother working 5 days a week, because all I'm going to do is end up ruining my quality of life, and for the pleasure of paying more money to the tax man. And one thing you realise as you get older, now I'm 66 now, is that your quality of life is valuable. Your health is valuable. Your quality of life is valuable. And I'm sort of not telling you anything you don't know. By the time you get 65, you're probably, the first 50 years at work are the most exciting. After that, I really don't want to drop dead on the job. So, well, okay, no euphemism intended. Unlike my father, who actually did literally drop dead on the job. Thanks, Viagra. But I'm well past the stage at which my children say to me, what, Dad, what do you want for Christmas? And I say, I've got everything. Everything I want, I've got. When you get to that stage, it's great. In fact, I'm chucking stuff out because I have got stuff that I don't want, that I've got that I don't want. And sometimes I say to my kids, the biggest favour you could do me will be to come round and take something. Give me some more room. But LAFA says if you tax at 0%, you get zero tax income. And if you tax everything at 100%, you also get zero tax income. So who's gonna go out to work just to pay you 100% of their income? So it's all right. I'm going over here. So there's a sort of a midway point, you know, where you get the most income that you're likely to get. But the trouble is, you know, you think when you come in, when you either come into life as a young person or you come into government as the Labour government, you always think, oh, I could push that a bit. I'm sure we could push that up a bit. But honestly, you can't. Really, everybody's pushed it as far as it could go, and usually a bit further than they should. So that's why reducing taxes sometimes brings more tax income in. But the Labour Party haven't learned either of those lessons, and they haven't in the last century and a bit, so they're not going to learn them now. That you must leave the free market. The free market is the only thing that has all the information required to do things like set prices for things like tickets. And secondly, you can't just look someone in the face and say, I think the rich should pay a bit more. I think the wealthy should pay a bit more, because that doesn't work. It's just the politics of envy. It's just like saying, you've got more money than me. I think I should have a bit of your money. But, you know, life doesn't work like that. Get your own effing money. Right. Okay. It's very philosophical this morning. It's because my blood pressure tablets are kicking in. I've got low blood pressure, so I'm very sort of laid back. All right. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.